Good afternoon. I have taken over Sarah's kitchen again. Earlier this week we made an amazing citrus custard and we topped it with whipped cream. So we decided to try to make it into like a meringue pie. So we're doing mandarin and orange. We're gonna put it in a graham cracker crust and we're gonna top it with some Swiss meringue, which I don't think either of us have ever made before. A long time ago. So I've got my 2 cups of citrus juice. We're adding white sugar, cornstarch, and salt. And then we're gonna get this up to a custard and then pour it into our graham cracker crust.
We had actually juiced the oranges the day before, and let me just tell you that juicing mandarin oranges is a labor of love. It is not easy to do. They are so tiny, but it was so worth it. So this time, for this batch, we did about half mandarin and half navel oranges. And the first time that we made it, we actually did all mandarin oranges. I will say that the fully mandarin orange batch was a lot more tart, but it was a really beautiful, well-rounded, deep flavored tartness too. But Sarah's husband did try that batch too, and he said it was just a little bit on the tart side, and so when we did the second batch, we cut it down. But her and I both absolutely adored the tartness. So I think that when I do this for a third time, I'm actually going to do about 3/4 worth of the juice mandarin and 1/4 worth be navel orange. And I do need to do this a third time. I'm planning to do it sometime in the next week or so because there are 2 spots that we absolutely failed in doing this custard. In doing this custard and in doing the meringue and the pie, there were a lot of pieces that just did not come together. So I really took my time when I was tempering it, and I just kind of drizzled it in really slow. And if you don't know what tempering is when it comes to eggs, what you're doing is bringing the eggs slowly up to temperature so that they don't turn into like a scrambled egg consistency. And so you start off just putting little bits of whatever your hot food is that you're putting your eggs into the eggs directly, and you whisk it really quickly, and you do just a little bit at a time. After that, you're going to transfer it back into your hot dish, and you're going to drizzle it really slow, whisking as fast as you possibly can. You want to keep everything moving so that you can bring those eggs up to temperature without them getting the opportunity to scramble from getting too hot too fast with not enough movement. So I did a really good job tempering them. I was really proud of myself, and this is where it all went wrong. So after you add the eggs, you're actually supposed to put it back onto the stove and cook it for a couple more minutes to help it thicken and set up. But as you can see, I skipped that step entirely, and I just jumped into adding the butter and the vanilla and then moved into pouring it into our pie crust. So this resulted in the pie being a completely soupy mess when we were done with it. So that was mistake number 1. So the thing that I learned was not to be overly confident in the kitchen and make sure that you read your recipe as you're going. While our custard pie was setting up in the fridge, we decided to move on to our Swiss meringue. Now, normally when you're doing a lemon meringue pie, you're going to do a different type of meringue, one that's going to bake in the oven. Since I didn't feel comfortable putting the custard in the oven, even though the recipe is very, very similar to lemon curd, I wasn't sure how it would act in the oven, so I decided to do a Swiss meringue instead, which is where you cook it over the bain-marie until the sugar is dissolved and it looks really nice and smooth and has gained a little bit of opaqueness. And like I said before, it was my first time doing it, and Sarah hasn't done it in a really long time, so I might have overcooked it at this phase. I'm not entirely sure, but I wanted to make sure that it was cooked nicely, so I went until everything felt dissolved and felt like it had kind of done what I thought it needed to do. Once it's done, you transfer it over and you are going to whisk it. So we started with the whisk attachment to see how it behaved, and it worked for a little while. It was coming together pretty nicely. It was definitely getting more opaque, getting some more volume, and starting to do what it needed to do. At one point, it got too thick for the whisk attachment, so I switched over to my beaters, and I had a really hard time getting through this. It was really stiff and sticky, unlike anything that I'd ever worked with, but then every time that I checked it, I was only getting soft peaks. It never got to the point where I was getting firm peaks out of it. One thing that we might have diagnosed is that we never used vinegar or lemon on any of the equipment, so there might have been a little bit of residual fat from the last thing that was cooked. Eventually, after about half an hour, maybe even 40 minutes of me working on this Swiss meringue, I was getting really frustrated and really tired. It was the end of the day, and Sarah decided that she was going to switch over and do an Italian meringue. So she actually made an Italian meringue to use instead because this was just not doing what we needed it to do. I made the Swiss meringue into a sweet potato pie, and we learned a lot in the kitchen that day.